Hard times knocking on my front door. I remember the inner city riots from '84 and Maggie Thatcher's hardcore war on the poor. The rich be getting richer cause they're always taking more.
Blessed are those under struggle. Oppression is worse than the grave. It's better to live and die for a noble cause than to live and die as a slave. This week I've been sent a couple of Instagram posts, a couple of WhatsApp messages, Telegram messages, Twitter feed messages, Facebook messages, explaining that there's a crazy case of racism going off in China right now. That Africans are being harried and being bludgeoned and being beaten and being evicted and being persecuted in China right now. That Africans in some cases are even being killed. That Africans are in some cases even being killed in China right now. That women, children, men, workers, the old, the infirm, anybody and everybody who appears to be of African descent is being persecuted right now. There was a man from Belgium who appeared to be of African descent, so he was beaten and persecuted right now. I didn't believe all of the stories when I heard them, but then I looked at the images, and whether I believe the stories or not, the images speak for themselves. A picture tells 1,000 words, and a picture tells 1,000 stories. So there were many conflicting emotions going through my mind after I had seen these images.
Look at everybody outside. Everybody is outside. Look at the Chinese police. They won't allow us to rest. They chased us away from our house. We don't have anywhere to live. They are pursuing us. Why?
This passport belongs to the federal government of Nigeria. In line with international practice, no any country have the right to seize the international passport of another country. Why are they seizing Nigerian passport? It not belong to the China.
They collected all our passports. Look at them. They collected all our passports.
We don't know where they are taking us to. We have been in quarantine for 14 days now. We don't know where they are taking us to.
They cannot give us house. They cannot give us hotel. They cannot provide a place we can stay.
They are not a criminal. They are not anything. Why are you harassing them?
Which brings me to ask the question, is it a black and white thing? Is it a death and life thing? Or is it that there are two different types of people in the face of the earth? Psychopaths, and for want of a better term, empaths. The pathology of psychopathy or the pathology of empathy? Which is the prevalent one? Which is the most prevalent trait within humankind? Because if I see, personally, if I see a man beating on a woman in the street, I will go to that woman's defense. If I see a group of guys beating on an individual, I will go to that individual's defense, personally. So this type of attitude and this type of emotion must extend from the personal to the community, from the community to the national, from the national to the universal, as a human trait. I think my reaction to seeing somebody else persecuted or beaten or downtrodden is a perfectly human reaction. It's the essential, quintessential human trait. But then if you look at the annals of history, if you look at the halls and the libraries of history, you'll see that basically bullying, incarceration, murder, body snatching, kidnapping, slavery, injustice, genocide, ethnic cleansing, all of this has been going on since time began. Since man was no longer satisfied with his own essential innate nature and decided that he wants to fulfill his desires and lusts, to forego his spiritual self for his material and carnal self. And when I look at this dichotomy, when I look at this binary opposition between the spiritual and the material, between the heaven and the earth, it reminds me of some of the ancient principles that were the guiding light of Africa. I mean, regardless as to whether or not you believe it or not, Africans, black people, those people which are the most persecuted people, are written about in the Bible. They are written about on the walls, in the tombs and the catacombs of the ancient pyramids. They are written about on the walls of Persia. They were the gods. They were the giants. They were the ones who brought civility and civilization to mankind and humankind. That might seem more like a parable than a matter of fact. But the reality of the matter is that you can't get brown or black from yellow. You can't get yellow from white. You can only get white, yellow, brown, red, and the multitude of the different types of complexions from the original black. So that tells you that the original black is the original. A lot of people dispute that because they have a psychopathic personality, or because they have a particular type and style of education, or because they believe that the white man is supreme. They believe in Aryan supremacy and white supremacy, or they believe that the Dravidians are supreme, that the Tamil are the first people in the face of the earth. Well, if the Tamil were the first people in the face of the earth, which they very may well have been, the original Tamil were black, blue, black. And that's a historical fact. That's a biological, that's a genetical fact. So let's just leave that to one side for now. The reason I'm actually saying that is that if these things are going to continue to happen, if the Arabs are going to come into Africa and enslave Africans in the 1st century BC, if the Romans are going to then go and do the same thing, if the Greeks then go and do the same thing, then the Europeans then go and do the same thing after their Enlightenment in the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century. And then now the Chinese are going to go and do the same thing. Then that says something about the nature of the Africans at home and abroad. I hear many black people, Caribbean people, American people say, no, don't call me no African. Don't call me no dirty African. And that is more a reflection of their internalization of white supremacy or self-hatred than what it is a reflection of anything else. That typifies how we've been miseducated, how we've been dehumanized, how we've been turned against our history, our culture, our families, and ourselves. One of the founding principles of any form of civilization has to be family. So in certain respects, you've got to take your hats off to the Chinese because they respect family. Laying aside the ideas that you can only have one child for a matter of years because of massive population explosion, etc. They have an ultimate respect for their elders, for their priests, for their government members, for their government, for their governors, for the police, for their army, for their people, for their self and for their family. This, I would hasten to add, is not reflected in the behavior of Africans at home or abroad. Perhaps in the one or two individuals it may well be. But as a people, as a society, as a culture, it's not a homogeneous mass. Africans are not. They are quite heterogeneous. But the one thing that can't be denied is the fact that nobody else wants you. Nobody else likes you. Nobody else wants to claim you. Nobody else wants to claim that you are their grandfathers, that you are their forebears. And they say, these dirty, nasty Africans. Ha! And there's old sayings and jokes about Africans, can a leopard change its spots? No. Well, neither can an Ethiopian. So Africans nowadays, we're in a malaise and a craze and a daze where we're constantly bleaching our skin, constantly indoctrinating ourselves and miseducating ourselves to become white people within. But what does that mean? Being white on the inside and not on the outside. It means that you have now foregone those values and principles which help to build Africa as the center of the universe in the days of ancient times, in the days of yore. in the days that went before. You have now forgone those principles. And what were those principles? What are those principles? What are those principles that you have forgotten? What were those principles? And what are those principles that you may remember, lest you forget, you may remember in order for you to take your place, rightful place, upon the table of civilized nations in the world? And let not others continue to come into your house, into your home, into your country, into your continent, into your universe, and declare you to be a dog and nothing more than a dog. These principles are based on spiritual realization, on self-realization through the practices of age-old spiritual rites, rituals, and sayings. In many cases, they were passed down orally. After they were passed down orally, as we progressed through space and time, they then became pictorial, hieroglyphic, and this went into a more abstract form as we progressed through time into writing systems and styles. But there is only one study of a people in the world called Egyptology. You don't have an Italianology. You don't have a Romanology. You don't have an Englishology. You don't have a Chineseology. Not yet, but in a few years there will be a Chineseology or Chinology. I guarantee you that. But the point that I'm making right here is that right now there is still this massive study of Egyptology. So they know, the students of the so-called civilized nations, they know what you don't know. They know that your culture, your history, your rituals, your spirit is very valuable. More importantly, they know that your land is the most valuable land in the face of the place called Earth. They love Africa. The Europeans love Africa. The Asians love Africa. The Caucasians love Africa. The Chinese love Africa. The Americans love Africa. Everybody loves Africa. But they don't like Africans. Everybody wants Africa, but they don't want Africans. I've got some Asian brown friends, some Asian yellow friends. Yeah, we're friends. But I know, and you know, that if it was a matter of a black man being married into their family or a white man being married into their family, 99 times out of 100, or should I say 95 times out of 100, their families would prefer a white man to be married into their family than a black man. Because Africans are not valued. I would say the reason for that is that because Africans don't value themselves. And this is best typified, or it's exemplified, in the way that we portray ourselves or in the way that we play ourselves in modern society. We have Beyonce, we have Rihanna as our role models, as our ambassadors of culture in modern society. The Chinese laugh at us. They say, hey, look how your women represent you. Look how you treat your mothers. Look how you treat your brothers. We have ambassadors like Snoop Doggy Dogg and Jay-Z, crack dealers and weed sellers and smokers, jokers, to be our ambassadors on a global scale. That's who we value in terms of modern culture, in terms of popular culture, in terms of modern society. We're a motherfucking joke. It's a damn travesty. It's a heresy. Or is it just an unnecessary burden upon the backs of Africa? The stories of the slaves that were taken into bondage throughout the Bible, they reflect Africa. Everybody wants the story of Africa. Everybody wants to claim that they were persecuted, but nobody is or has been persecuted like unto the Africans. Now that might tell you something. And that's something that it needs to tell you, is that if you don't learn from the mistakes of history, then you are doomed. We are doomed to repeat them in the here and now. It's time, high time, for Africa and Africans at home and abroad to wake up. to wake up from the spell of Kingu, to wake up and take up the mantle to be a man. And don't let your brothers and sisters be treated like dogs and paraded on the screens of cinemas and films and TV and YouTube and the internet as nothing but dogs and whores, bitches and dogs. That's what we've become. That's what you've become by virtue of your foregoing the spiritual principles which have been laid down for you, which have been laid down by you, for you, by your ancestors, for you. But you don't want to know about them. You want to run from your father. Africans in the United Kingdom have been here for hundreds of years. But there's no trace of that. Increasingly so, or more importantly so, or more contemporary, they've been here for a good 50, 60, 70 years. But there's next to no trace of that. All we have here, basically, are a few dumpling shops and a few haircutting shops. That's disgusting. That's a sign of severe underachievement. Some of the principles that have put us into this position, the Europeans, the Chinese, Hermeticism, Sufism, Confucianism, Buddhism, all of these other cultures from around the world, Christianity, Islam, all of these other religions from around the world have basically appropriated for themselves allegories, stories, parables, spiritual sayings, which were handed down by word of mouth from father to son, from mother to daughter, throughout the annals of history. Now we Africans, you Africans, suffer from ignorance and cupidity. We suffer from laziness and stupidity. We have a desire to possess materials that are of no value to you. They have no use for you. We're in this trap of consumerism, this trap of materialism, this trap of being caught in a modern day Leviathan, this trap of being caught in a modern day spell of Kingu. And we're running around like modern day slaves.
The stampedes, the gate crashing, the pushing.
Do not push me! It's a TV for God's sake!
Even tasing. Shoppers consumed with the deal turning on one another. At this Walmart last year, one used pepper spray to fight suffocation in the crowd.
Yes, sir, massa. No, sir, massa. We have to bow down and curtail to the Europeans in Africa, to the Asians in Africa, to the Chinese in Africa, to everybody else apart from your own self. Now, this is a matter of madness and melee within us, and we need to get down to the bottom of it. You need to get down to the bottom of it. I remember hearing a story a few years ago of a Nigerian football team that had, for the first time, a black manager. Then I heard that the team went on strike because they would not perform, they would not train, they would not go and do as they were supposed to do as footballers for a black manager. They wanted a yellow manager or a red manager or a light skin manager or a white manager. Better yet, best still, is the white manager. And if and when they had that, then they would go out and they would perform. Now, this type of attitude, you have to look within yourself and exercise that attitude. It's got a lot to do with the religions that have been pushed on us. But what you have to understand, what we need to at least acknowledge, is that all of these religions are derived from your original, traditional religions. But the trap comes in when you forget yourself. The trap falls in when you fall privy to ignorance and cupidity, which is the avarice or the gluttonous or the greediness and the want to possess material. Cupidity is the need or the greed to possess material. Avarice. And the rest of human frailties, the rest of human desires, lust, greed, jealousy. When these things come in, when you appropriate those ideas and those spiritual values, then you become lost. And we become lost. We don't worship the elders or ancestors anymore. We're falling into the trap of rural to urban migration. Do you think now, Africans, that the God is to be found in a church built by bricks and mortar? Do you think now, Africans, that the God is to be found in a mosque built by drugs and human slaughter? Do you think now, Africans, that God is to be found in a church or a mosque of bricks and mortar? Or is the God still to be found in the air, the wind, the earth, and the water? Africa, look to yourselves. I'm not asking anybody to go out and create some form of retribution. Is look, rather than we get together and create conflict and more violence, rather than we get together and create further conflict and more violence, it's better that blacks within this community, within England, come together and create their own shop. Put some money together, put some money aside and create your own business. So thereby you don't need to fraternize. You don't need to sponsor every other race apart from those that have your same face, or every other person that doesn't look like you apart from yourself. I said it's better we go and build our own shops. Not just dumpling shop. Not just dumpling shops. Not just barber shop. Even factories, even supermarkets. Why isn't Africa producing its own socks? Why isn't Africa producing its own t-shirts or shirts anymore? Why isn't Africa producing its own shoes? Why don't we have an African automobile company, car manufacturers, satellite companies? Why don't we have them? Why does everything that we ever do right now in modern society have to come from somewhere else, have to be supporting somebody else? Everybody wants in on Africa, but nobody wants Africans. Africans want everything that everybody else has, but they don't want to look beneath their own feet to see what they have.
Hard times knocking on my front door, I remember the inner city riots from 84 and Maggie Thatcher's hardcore war on the poor. The rich be getting richer cause they're always taking more. So we went to school with the holes in the soles of the shoes. The teachers used to laugh when we expressed our views. I went home kinda confused. I watched my mom's drown away your sorrows and booze. The Thunderbird is special bruise, but yo, I refuse to lose. Work hard, train hard, praise God cause I'm a winner. Remember the times we only had sleep for dinner. Robbers, thief and hustler, nothing but sinners inside the room. From the womb to the tomb, I wasn't born with a silver spoon. So